Yep.
Ok, se siamo in diretta partirei, well, in English probably. Thank you for coming. Sorry for my delay. This was entirely my responsibility. I'm sorry for that. I think we can proceed with the presentation. Now we can see your file. I simply have to introduce the candidate, Beatrice Rono, and I don't have to read the title because it's already projected in our screen, but for everybody, I will simply say that it's a dissertation to be presented with Alessandra Viviani as a supervisor, professor of don't remember the title of the subject, but something like human rights or around human rights, let's say. And in any case, I would leave the floor to Alessandra, to colleague Viviani, to have a more detailed introduction. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon. The thesis that the candidate submits today deals with a very relevant issue in international law in general and international human rights law in particular, which is the rules applicable to people seeking asylum and refugee people. And it does so from the perspective of the African Convention dated 1969, which, as we are going to see, is also closely related to the principles established in the UN Convention on Refugees dated 1951. So in her thesis, Beatrice analyzes, first of all, the questions related to the phenomenon of refugeeism in Africa. Then in the second part of the thesis, she analyzes the legal standards concerning the treatment of refugees according to international law and to the African Convention. And finally, she deals upon the case study of Kenya and how the policies adopted in this country have been changing according to different approaches adopted in treating refugee crisis. So I will leave the floor to Beatrice, asking her to present to the Commission, to the board, the results of her research. Please, Beatrice.
Thank you, Professor. So my name, as you've been told, is Beatrice, and this particular topic is of very interest for me, first because I come from Kenya, and Kenya is one of the countries that hasn't, in as much as African countries to be considered, hasn't taken into so much keen interest the idea or the aspect of refugeeism, even though it's existing in its geographical positioning is a sort of troubled neighborhood. If you look on the side of Tanzania, Sudan, and Somalia, and as well a bit of Ethiopia. Now, to the outline on how the study will go, we are going to first of all look at the background of this thesis. Where are we coming from with this thesis? Looking back to the situation of refugees in Africa before this convention and after this convention. So, and the motivation to that, why is it important to look at it right now, even though it's been, the convention has been there for 50 years, and the objectives of the study at the end of this presentation, what would be the things or the questions we would want answers to, or we would have wanted to analyze. We look at the scope of how the period of time which we will be analyzing, and of course the case study and recommendation after that. Now, the refugee situation in Africa, it can simply be explained in two eras, in two refugee regimes. There was the first period when there were people fleeing their countries to seek for refuges in neighboring countries, and that was during the colonial era, and that was defined much more better by open door policies. People would be able to access neighboring countries. They would be integrated. They would be resettled. And but again, those were the times with the numbers was not as much as after. This would be the open door policy was between the 60s and the 70s, but after in the 80s, after that in the 80s, then there was the closed door policies where countries started changing their attitude towards receiving refugees, resettling them, or even integrating them in their countries. Now, but in between that, there was a very important development in the legal framework that was applicable in the continent at that time, and that was the development or the establishment of the 1969 AU Convention, which was governing specific problems affecting African refugees. And this was a very important in the fact that it suited the refugees or the definition of a refugee in Africa. Initially, the reason why the refugees were fleeing were only fitting the first definition in the UN in the 1957 UN Convention in its protocol in 1967, which was that their life would be at risk, but it wasn't saying for what reason their life was at risk. And this was there to fill in this gap by explaining the fact that these people will be fleeing because of foreign domination or occupation. Now, after this was, and then after this development and the closed door policy that was enacted by most of the countries, or literally the whole continent developed this attitude, there was the crisis, which if you think about it, the legal development was supposed to cushion this situation and to help or assist in the refugee situation not becoming a crisis or reaching a crisis level. But from the mid-90s, countries were developed less desirable attitude towards refugees. They started blocking them from entering their borders, or just refouling them forcefully to their own countries. So we look at the developed legal framework, and we look at why it did not cushion these refugees. Now, the reason why we are asking this question and the reason why we have this study is because over 50 years after its enactment, the population of refugees has increased drastically. Today, we have statistics show 26% of the world refugees being Africans. That means 1 in every 2 refugees in the world is African. Now, in as at the end of 2019, in the sub-Saharan region, Uganda and Ethiopia had the highest caseloads of refugees, obviously from its neighboring countries as well: Sudan, Burundi, Rwanda, and Ethiopia to some extent was. And Ethiopia as well was receiving other refugees from Sudan, Somalia as well on the other end. Now, by mid of last year, each of these countries had at least over 1 million of refugee numbers in their territories. Kenya, which is our case study, had over 1 million. with majority of them being from Somalia and from Sudan, with over 200,000 refugees. Now, this is happening in the wake of declined durable solutions. There is no resolution towards, there's no plan, or there's no aspiration towards coming up with durable solutions towards resettling these refugees, or refouling them, or refouling them if the conditions allows, or resettling them in a third country, in the case of burden sharing. And the idea that also has developed among countries, viewing refugees as active participants in conflicts rather than being victims of the conflict. And so the question basically that we would be asking would be, is this framework enough to enforce durable solutions? Because that is the thing that we would be basing on if we are looking at resolving this situation, or solving this crisis in Africa at the moment. So the objectives would be, we would want to understand the aspect of non-refoulement principle as a key concept of the refugee law. Also, we would outline the legal obligations for both the refugee and the state, considering the process and procedures within which refugees are determined or qualified, and ultimately deduce the applicability of the existing framework, which is ideally the basis of this whole study. Now, our scope would be after the enactment of the 1969 OE Convention, and that would be after the 60s to date, to, let's say, last year, because we are looking at the efficiency of this convention. So it's only paramount that we look at the years within which it was already enacted and was supposed to be in action, or to make a difference in the refugee situation in Africa, or in Africa as a continent. Now, this convention we can analyze the effect or the application of this convention in a form of a process, because the refugee situation could be characterized as a process system where it's different couple of processes put together to reach to a resolution. And that would start from the fact that a person in a country in Sudan or Somalia has to flee because there's a conflict in their country that's affecting the whole country or affecting part of the country, but then it somehow forces them out of the country. And so they arrive at the border of a different country, a neighboring country, and as soon as they step into their soil, they are qualified to the right of non-refoulement. But that is only if they get to cross the border, if they get to be admitted in the second country. Now, once they get admitted in the second country, there is the process of determining this refugee and giving them the status of a refugee. And so they have, as a duty, need to be able to present themselves to an authority of the country that they have gone into and claim the status of refugees and of a refugee. And now it will be up to the government to justify any further detention after that. Now, that is where the problem is, because after they put in their claim for refugee status, they get probably temporary IDs to allow them to stay in the country or to exist as registered refugees. But then the resolution to that, ultimately, whether they get resettled or naturalized or transferred to a third country, is what we have as a problem. Because, sorry, as it is, most of the refugees have remained and camped in camps with no plan to do anything or to provide any solution, a long-lasting solution. Refugee status is not a long-term identity. It ends at some point. 6-7 years should be the bare minimum that they should be able to be there, depending on how bad the situation would be at home, or more than 20 years is just should not be acceptable. Now, the reason why these challenges are being experienced and therefore leading to a non-solution, non-resolution, and again making it a crisis is because countries have taken up to themselves to block their borders, because as soon as they are not able to allow these refugees to cross the border, that denies them the right to access the non-refoulement protection. Also, the fact that there's no definitive way or procedures that this rule should be applied like this, or in within this period of time. And even though some countries like Kenya actually identifies or qualifies refugees as refugees on the basis of prima facie or statutory, most of the time it's because it's beyond beyond doubt that the reason a person has fled from Somalia is because it's what's affecting the whole country at the time. There's a definitive proof that they had to flee because their life is in danger. Now, prolonged detention at the camps as well has led to protracted situations, and so there's no solution. And some of the few times we've had countries have to forcefully refer refugees to their countries of origin, and in certain scenarios they have to escape to third countries. And this, we have examples of Tanzania in 1996. They had to refoul forcefully the Rwandan refugees, who were more than 500,000 in the country, for reasons of their security, for reasons of their resources were not able to accommodate this number of people in their country, because they, at this point, in addition with the Burundian refugees, they were almost more than the population of Tanzania. Now, before we go ahead to now look at Kenya as a country and try to look at how they've handled the refugee situation, I want to also touch on the fact that the international organization, the UNHCR, is, like in the situation of Tanzania, they collaborated with the government to refoul these refugees to Rwanda, and this is because the refugee situation has been caught in between. The UNHCR has been caught in between having to handle it basing on humanitarianism versus having to look at it as a geopolitical mission. And so they have to choose between protecting the rights of the refugees and non-refoulement, and which is in direct conflict with political and security priorities. And so in the end, they decide to refoul these refugees. Even though they actually assist in refouling these refugees, it doesn't change the fact that they are returning them to countries where their lives would be a risk. At that time,
Beatrice, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but could you please move towards the conclusion of your presentations, because the time is kind of limited. Huh?
Okay, sure. All right, so Kenya, looking at Kenya and what it stands by, it's a signatory of both the conventions. It also has a Refugee Act, which was rejected by the president. It was passed by parliament, but it was rejected by the president, throwing it back to the floor to be rediscussed. A bit of its history in the 70s, Kenya had barely 20,000 refugees, and at this point, we know of the Ugandan refugees who had to flee to Kenya, and they were integrated. They got jobs. They were teachers in Kenya who were from Uganda. They had IDs, but in 1990, beginning of 1990, there was the arrival of the Lost Boys of Sudan, which led to Kenya upholding restrictive policies, which included the encampment policy, and later even becoming more draconian and pushing them to stop registration and want to close the Dadaab camp. Now, these are the refugee policies in Kenya at the moment. They have encampment policies enacted, securitization of refugees. They have forced refoulement. The Somali refugees have been forced to be back to their countries, and when the Dadaab camp closes, that would probably be the reason. They want to have only 150,000 refugees in the country. The implication of this is we've had now protracted situations, we have poverty and lack of resources to accommodate increasing inflows, and so this responsibility being under the countries with meager resources, they are also living in deplorable conditions, and they become vulnerable to a lot of things that could affect them or affect their lives. Now, the challenges that we are facing here towards even finding a durable solution or a way to getting into a durable solution would be, they are a lot of political interference. The refugee situation is inherently political, and so now it's more politics takes stands over ethics, which is supposed to be the pushing factor of implementing this. Also, the static definition of refugees, the causes have changed, and the definition of refugee will change with time and territory, but this has remained static, which is not applicable. Now, there is also the question of supervising the implementation. There's no supervisory body. The UN High Commission should be able to do that, but it has no authority to impose any kind of change or way of interpreting this legal framework. Also, the fact that the aspect of burden sharing, which has been encouraged, it was encouraged in both convention, has not been taken up by any of these countries. Now, in conclusion, the current refugee system in Africa has not been able to stand the test to regulate the state relationships and to be able to protect these refugees. It's left refugees in limbo when the countries which have are still entangled in chronic wars. That means increasing numbers of refugees, but then the struggling economies, the lack of a robust system to process these refugees or to protect them renders unforeseeable, durable solutions. The current legal framework protecting refugees is not enough to salvage the refugee crisis that's hit the continent and which could get worse. It's estimated that it could get to 30% of the world's refugee numbers in 2030 or 2050. And so my recommendation would be that the UN or the AU should be able to create a supervisory body and an expert supervisory body that would be able to ensure there is right interpretation and implementation of the legal framework. They also need to rethink, reaffirm the definition of refugee. There should be consideration of considering the non-refoulement principle as jus cogens, even though its controvertibility could cause problems in the implementation of international law. This would be able to give a first hand to the refugees because as humans, they have a right to be protected. Also, they should be a cooperation between states in ensuring that there is work being done towards gaining durable solutions. And this is not a situation that's affecting one country. It's many hands resolve one issue country. And so the agenda to develop an efficient, robust system in which rules and regulations would be applied should be the intention of the globe. And lastly, there should be a change of attitude towards refugees, allowing them to work, allowing them to contribute to the economy should be encouraged as opposed to seeing them as a burden.
Thank
That
you.
makes the last point of my presentation today.
Thank you.
Obviously, it's a very wide topic that would need more time to be able to cover a lot of things.
Yeah.
Well, this applies to many of our puzzles, but we thank you for keeping this reasonably compacted, and the floor is to the supervisor and the co-supervisor, Andrea Francioni, Professor Francioni, for comments and questions.
Thank you, Chairman. But actually, Beatrice provided a pretty detailed presentation, so I don't have any question. Just an observation. Do you think that, would you define your country, I mean Kenya, as a reluctant host or not?
Sorry, would I define it as a what?
Reluctant host. The definition that you used in the first chapter.
Yeah, it is very reluctant, and I'm not sure that it will cooperate very much in trying to find a solution altogether. First, because it's a very politicized system. Most of its decisions are not made out of the big picture of the continent, because it's in the territory, in the sub-Saharan region, the East African region. It has a better economy, so you'd expect it to take the lead in decisions that affect the region, but it doesn't. And right now they got into a situation to Somalia, because, well, there's been a problem between Somalia and Kenya, and most of the refugees, that's why they're trying to close Dadaab, is because there is a political influence, there's a political rift in between these two countries.
Yeah, and obviously,
so definitely reluctant, yes.
It's a sensitive issue regarding home politics, I would say. Yeah, thank you, Beatrice. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Alessandra?
I'm fine, thank you. No further questions.
Okay, so at this point, I have to ask everybody from the floor, from the committee, if there are any other point. Otherwise, I would close for a while these. And actually, Alessandra Viviani was so kind to send us her thing. Actually, I should have done. I forgot. Thank you, Alessandra, to do that. And so we reconvene here with the audience in a few minutes.
You wait here, Beatrice. You don't need to disconnect yourself.
Yeah. We will, but you'll be there. Thank you so much.
Okay.
All right. No worries. Thanks, as all. Can I move myself up? I don't get window. Okay, stop sharing. And interrompe. Okay. Damn, it's like. Sorry.
Okay. I think we are ready now. I think also the audience is
Pierangelo, forse
is with us. Yeah, Pierangelo, can you yeah, thanks. So I'm sorry that there's nobody in a class, nor Beatrice, neither any of us, because in the end, since Pierangelo is and me, we were alone and the room was closed, we decided to standardize a sort of full online. But I'm sure we'll be in touch soon, and we can meet soon in a real place, not in a virtual place. At the moment, I simply have to read this, and I will be I'll be very happy to do that. This proclamation, which is the following. Miss Beatrice Sorono, given the results of your academic career, this commission has approved your degree examination with a score of 107 out of 110. Therefore, by the power conferred in us by the rector, and in the name of the law, we proclaim you Dottore Magistrale in Public and Cultural Diplomacy in class LM81, Development and International Cooperation. Thank you, and congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
Okay. All the best. See you soon.
See you. Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Best Beatrice. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Vabbè, abbiamo
Bye-bye.
fatto anche questa.
Bye.
Bye.
Ale, forse prima della serata riesco a risponderti sui chiudo.
Ah, ma guarda, non mi devi rispondere, devi solo andare sulla piattaforma a vedere
Sì,
se
no,
qualcuno ti
risponderti in quel
piace.
senso
Quello
lì.
stesso, Andrea.
Lo faccio.
Arrivederci.
Tra oggi e
Ciao,
domani lo
Rossella.
faccio.
Ciao.
Ciao. State bene.
Ciao.
Ciao.
A presto
Ma
a
insomma,
tutti.
sei sopravvissuta a una brutta esperienza, mi pare di capire, Luca.
Allora-
Perché noi abbiamo in CDA tutta la mattina e te eri lì
No.
nella stanza accanto?
No, ma io ero andato lì all'ora di pranzo per parlare con Milena di una cosa. Poi mi chiamano da medicina, mi dicono sei in rettorato.